Phoenix Art Therapy Institute who are eager to learn about art therapy. As you might know, art therapy has been around for a while, and in this particular country, Margaret Naumburg is considered a pioneer in this field, and she used to teach art therapy in New York for many, many years, and has written several books which sort of lay the groundwork for a psychoanalytic approach to art therapy. I had the pleasure of working with Margaret Naumburg, whom I invited to come to Toronto at the time when we opened, for the opening of the new headquarters of our Board of Education, the Toronto Board of Education, and we presented a workshop on art therapy together, which was very rewarding to me, and I think also for the audience and to Margaret Naumburg. Now, she introduced the concept derived from dream interpretation to not limit one's study of the human psyche to what is known as our consciousness. She, based on the work that was done in dream analysis by Freud and analysts generally, she was able to apply the same principles that are used in dream analysis to the analysis of artwork. Now, what do they have in common? They both derive information from the unconscious. The unconscious, of course, is a vital source of energy for all our thoughts and feelings and images and so on. But many of those are prevented from being as active in our conscious life. I think in our conscious life, our thoughts, we design our thoughts and express them with a certain amount of clarity, but at the base of those thoughts or feelings or images is a foundation that reaches deep into the unconscious, and that from which one can derive all kinds of additional information that is not available to us on a conscious level. Now, the information that the unconscious provides us with is not expressed in clear language. It is expressed in symbolic language. Now, the symbolic language is never totally understood. We can pursue the understanding of symbols to a certain point, and beyond that point, it loses clarity. So it is a symbolic language that can add many levels of meaning to what we express in our art. As one goes on exploring these different levels of meaning, one realizes that the art itself provides the stimulus, if you like, for the connections that are established between the forms that we put, or the shapes that we put on paper, for instance, and what unconscious additional material is become attached to those on the basis of the affinity that exists between the visual image and and the underlying unconscious material. It is very much like the tip of an iceberg that is visible to us, and then we know that it rests on a much more substantial mass that represents the foundation of this iceberg. And out of that foundation, the art that we put on paper links up with relevant, associatively connected material that is relevant to give meaning to the art that is being expressed. In other words, the symbols, it draws on the symbols, draws them to consciousness, and then it is up to us to try to understand the deeper meaning of these symbols and to hopefully explore them in as much depth as we can reach. Now, in addition to it, of course, we need to be aware that free association is the principal instrumentality that can lead us on the road to discover meaning. These associations might be either in relationship to the forms that you paint, to the colors that you use, to the movement that you see in the painting, to the repetition of certain themes that seem to manifest themselves again and again in paintings. Each of those can add additional meaning singly or in combination to round out the ultimate meaning that we can eventually hope to derive from our work. So free associations is a process, as you might know, in which you simply permit your mind to wander and to see what it is that a particular color that you have depicted in the painting, what does this color what is this color associated with? Is it a color that permits you, that evokes in you a positive response? Is it a color that creates fear in you? Is it a color that expresses very strong angry feelings in you? Feelings that you may or may not have been aware of, because you remember that this material is derived from the unconscious, which is out of the reach of our awareness. But each artistic product touches with contact something in the unconscious that is relevantly related to it, and it is as precise as any conscious logic can be, and more, because it is derived from patterns that have been laid down way back in our past. And while the unconscious seems to be not resting on what you might call a syntax and seems to be more chaotic, it nevertheless has its own well-established patterns that, if one pursues the search of meaning in the unconscious, you come to understand these patterns, which in some can give considerable meaning to what the painting, to which the painting has led us to. In other words, the painting is a stimulus that leads us to what you might call the result eventually, and the result informs us about who we are, why we are, what we are looking forward to being, and so on and so on. What it requires is to overcome the initial anxiety that everybody faces in one's self-examination. Human beings have a considerable hesitation, or you might call it resistance, not resistance in the usual meaning, but resistance that is unconscious, that needs to be overcome in order to gradually feel freer and more spontaneous to create what ultimately is bound to be the end result of what you set out to do, even though at the beginning you may have no awareness whatsoever where you are going to end up with, or where you will get to, what material you will get to. But whatever you will discover is common human material. In other words, you will the more deeper we go into the exploration of our unconscious, the more do we discover how much we have in common. It is only that in our conscious life that we tend to look for differences, that to distinguish one from somebody else, because of all the conflictual elements that do not permit the type of acceptance of a certain universality of human existence. But in our unconscious, which is beyond our control, this universal human phenomenon, if you like, is ever present. So to overcome the barrier between the unconscious and the conscious is also to eliminate the tension that regularly exists in the face of our ignorance of our unconscious. In other words, the more we can make meaning of more meaning of our unconscious processes in our lives, the less is there tension between the conscious and the unconscious. I feel that this tension is an ever-present issue in our lives. We have no conscious awareness of it, but it becomes the background to our day-to-day life without our having any clear understanding of what it might be that might be creative of this tension. But it is like a world we know and a world we don't know, and the tension is between those two worlds. And the more we can render the unknown world not knowable, to that extent do we eliminate tension, which of course saves energy, which then can be invested in whatever pursuit of life that we are engaged in life. I feel that all of you who are taking training are bound to benefit from the necessary requirement of self-examination, which is part and parcel of your training. And in whatever form you get your therapy, you need to come to a clearer and better understanding of what it is that in your own life interferes with your creativity, and in what way it can be, you can liberate yourself to a point where you can be more spontaneous, more creative, more content with yourself, less conflicted, of course. And it is only when you reach this stage in your own development that you can achieve the ultimate position for you to be an art therapist. An art therapist, or for that matter any other therapist, whose own life is not as clearly and as fully resolved as it potentially could be, is limited by this handicap. And I can only encourage you to engage in your self-examination, and with the help of your therapists, and of course also throughout your association with the Institute, which has a therapeutic climate that everybody can fit in which the distinction between the teacher's psyche and the student psyche is not seen as different, but simply a reflection of the individual's quite natural state, and therefore it is not subjected in itself to any type of judgment.
Could you address how psychodynamically one combines the psychodynamic theory with art?
Yeah, well, psychodynamically, we need to understand that we have what is known, our mind has what is known as a manifest content, which is, can be equated with our consciousness. And of course, there's a latent content, which is part and parcel of the structure of our unconscious. And it is to render the unconscious conscious is the essential core of psychoanalytic psychotherapy. And the same applies to analytically based art therapy, because it is through the use of symbols that provides us with clues to understand what is the latent content, what is the condition of our unconscious. This is the most basic connection between the two, you see. You need to get familiar with the relationship between manifest and conscious and latent and unconscious. These terms are mutually exchangeable, so to speak. Yeah. As to the value that art therapy can have, not only for you as a young professional engaged in trying to learn the skill of an art therapist, but it can have wide-ranging consequences which would be of benefit to other human beings and of course to the community in which you work. One of those that I've always been interested in is to use art therapy as a primary method of prevention, particularly in children, particularly in young children, and in our educational system generally. It has always been my view that it is much preferable to save a child from rolling down a hill and end up with major injuries than to pick the child up after it already had fallen down and then try to heal the wounds. I feel that prevention is the ultimate goal of all healing, and unfortunately it is a much neglected area, not only here but not only in the United States but all over the world. I think we are beginning to think of prevention now in the area of nutrition and in the area of genetics and so on. So there is a beginning greater awareness of what needs to be done to keep people healthy. But given the society in which you live in, many children indicate their disturbances quite early, and since children are not very familiar with in verbal communication, they communicate much more meaningfully through the art. And I think my notion is that if each school would have what I call a decompression chamber, in which children who are either late coming to school regularly or who come in a rather disheveled state to school, or who are acting out in the classroom, either by being extremely shy or by being extremely aggressive, or who have behavioral problems other behavioral problems that make their life in the school very difficult. I think all those symptomatic behaviors can be understood by the use of spontaneous art. We can discover what the origins of these behaviors are. One can discover precisely what the relationship between the child and the parents are, between the child and its siblings, and so on, and gradually illuminate the child's background and see it as a source of subsequent symptomatic behavior. This, to my mind, would make a good deal more sense than to keep a child late in school because it comes late regularly, which does not address the issue at all, or to punish a child because it acts out, as if the child is totally responsible for his or her actions, which is a very short-sighted way to sit in judgment over a child. I think one needs to understand where does this behavior come from, and nothing is gained by sending a child from the classroom to the vice principal's office where he or she sits for 2 or 3 hours and then is disciplined by the vice principal, and one is not wiser as to why did this behavior take place in the first place. So I think prevention in schools, to my mind, are the only hope to improve the quality of life in young adults, and of course in progressively in other age groups as well. But it has to start out with at the beginning, rather than to institute treatment for a child that has become seriously delinquent in the late teens, for instance. I think one needs to try to act preventatively. Now, this would also have a very beneficial effect on the school teachers who regularly suffer from burnout, as the term goes, because not knowing why the child behaves the way it does, the teacher often uses counter-aggressive measures which only compound the issue and create a much more difficult situation to deal with than it was at the beginning. So much for school, but then you can see the prevention of delinquent acting out behavior. If you take the question of school vandalism, millions of dollars are spent in schools to repair damage that is done by children who are acting out. If all this money could be used to hire art therapists who can take a look at these children in their art room, where they could give full expression to what it is that is troublesome in their lives without being compelled or judged or criticized, it would be a new emotional experience for these children. They would freely share what it is that is painful to themselves and has been probably for a long period of time without being recognized by anybody who seems to know the child, but actually the knowledge is only very superficial because the child often does not share its concerns verbally. Whereas in art, children are much more open and much more generous in providing information about themselves. The same, of course, applies to other age groups, but I want to emphasize that the earlier one can identify problematic behavior, the better. But of course, one can continuously learn about oneself and why we behave the way we do or why we feel the way we do through the use of art therapy, because the art provides us with a clear lens that magnifies issues in such a way that we can properly read them and properly discuss them and eventually work them through and resolve them, so that life can take on a much more mature direction and a much more satisfying path. Now, it can be used, of course, as well in art therapy, can be used as well in different societal institutions, be it hospitals, general hospitals, to help people cope with chronic illness or to understand why certain acute illnesses occur. They can help us in, it can help in psychiatric facilities, where often the disordered way of thinking or feeling are given very clear and lucid expression, which otherwise may not be observed or understood if we were to rely only on verbal communication. Of course, you are familiar with the use of art therapy, and whether it is done individual or in groups, in geriatrics, in marital therapy, in family art therapy, and so on. So that the scope is quite considerable, and it only will depend on your own curiosity and your own interest and motivation to focus on all these areas, or to choose areas that for which you have a particular affinity for, and then pursue it in depth so that you can develop the necessary skills and competence to do justice to yourself as well as to your profession. I think this is probably a reasonable survey of what art therapy means, where it could be applied, who would benefit from it, and in what way can it, together with other helping professions, present a more comprehensive approach, both in prevention as well as in therapy.
At the Toronto Art Therapy Institute and at the Phoenix Art Therapy Institute, they use spontaneous art. I wonder if you could say a little bit about the merits of spontaneous art, because I understand there are many directed therapies and many different ways of using art.
Yeah, well, spontaneous art is a pursuit of art that is not carried out in response to anybody's request or any preconceived notions that the individual, him or herself, has, but where one tries to create a state of mind that you might call that is free of any preconceived ideas, and then permitting oneself to give expression to what comes to mind. It is as if the mind is a tabula rasa, a clear table, and then you begin to put various things on the table. Whether we ever can achieve total clarity or total absence of any intentional thoughts that cross our mind is a theoretical question, and should not bother us. But we can, relatively speaking, achieve a reasonably clear and open mind, and where we then let the art emerge in its own right, so to speak. And it is a very effective way of providing an opportunity for what you might call a priority of urgency that enters into what is being given expression to. I often say to people that what is what one is worried about most at that particular time in life tends to find first expression in spontaneous art, in the very first one or two paintings, and therefore you can have some clue as to what the major issue might be, which is an indication of which you might get through the use of spontaneous art right at the very beginning of the process. Yeah. Now, if one can maintain a condition of spontaneity throughout an art session, one provides oneself with an optimal opportunity for discovery of self and issues that affect your life at that particular time, or retroactively points in the direction of influences that have shaped your life, and of course sometimes shaped your life in a manner that was not in the best of your interest. You become aware of patterns that your life has taken, which in themselves are not adaptive, sufficiently adaptive, but often continue to remain maladaptive. I think that this probably answers your question. Yeah. Okay? Okay.
Stop now.